in order to get the principle of a network across, I have to convey to you an idea which is extremely simple, but which is difficult to grasp only because we're not used to it. We are used to thinking as Westerners, as having a certain kind of language, and therefore a certain kind of logic that goes with it. We're used to thinking of the world in terms of the game of billiards. In other words, we are still thinking about our psychology, our bodies, and their relationship to the outside world in terms of what would scientifically be called Newtonian mechanics. And Newtonian mechanics has a very long history because it goes back to some of the atomic theories of people like Democritus, who were among the great pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece. And so we may as well begin with a little bit about the history of the idea of an atom, because this has always fascinated people. What is the world fundamentally? What is all this? Well, one way of finding out is to take a knife and chop something in two so you can see what's inside it. What is an apple inside? What is a seed inside? What is a human body inside? And then you find that when you chop a thing in two, you've got two pieces, but the cutting reveals that it has a structure inside. And the structure is composed of what we call organs or parts. And then in turn, in order to inquire into them, we take them and we chop them apart. And in our curiosity to find out how it's made, in just the same way that a child will take a toy to pieces, we chop and chop and chop until we've got bits so small that they are the same width as the edge of the knife. And they can't be cut anymore unless we can find a finer knife. And so when we get down to that bit beyond which there is no bitter, that is to say it can't be chopped any further, it is called in Greek atomos, which means, the first letter a means non, tomos, cuttable. And so the word atom means that smallest particle of the world which can't be cut into any smaller particle. That's the original idea of atomism. So then, it went further than that to the notion that the world was built of atoms in the same sort of way that a house could be built of bricks or stones. The world is seen, therefore, as a composite of fundamental particles. Then what remained to be discovered was the laws governing the relationship between these particles. And so naturally one thought of them as little balls. Why balls? Because balls are hard to cut. If you take a ball bearing and hit at it with a sword, it's liable to jump right off to one side. A cube will submit to being cut, but a ball is very difficult to get at. A very strong form of nature. So people have always tended to consider atoms as balls, especially atoms of liquid. There was a notion, you see, that the atoms of the element of earth were cubes, because cubes all sit together rather firmly. Liquid, which when you put up good bloop, that was balls. Fire was made of, if I remember rightly, little pyramids. Air, I can't remember what air was made of, and what their atoms were shaped like. Maybe sausages or something like that, because air is pretty difficult to get at too. But they had some ideas. But fundamentally, what has influenced Western thought, and still influences Western thought, is the idea of an atom as some sort of fundamental little planetary system. And so these things come into relationship with each other, and they bang each other around, as in the game of billiards. And so if we are to understand the world profoundly, we have to find out what are the laws governing the relationship of the atoms. Now, you must understand, first of all, a principle about what are called laws of nature. We inherit the idea of laws of nature from our theology. And our theology that we've grown up with is in certain ways peculiarly different from the theologies of Oriental peoples. Jewish theology and Christian theology, which have entered very profoundly into the common sense of the average person, have an image of the world which is quite basically political, and we'll go further than that and say it's monarchical. It's based on the idea that the world is a construct evoked out of nothingness by the commandment of a celestial king. Now, there may be Jews in this room who are practicing and devout Jews, and there may be Christians in this room who are practicing and devout Christians. And I don't want to offend you by any imagery that I choose or remarks that I may make about this imagery, because I don't suppose that anybody has come to this room and to this particular place who is either a practicing or Christian Jew who has what I would call a naive idea of God. But the funny thing is about our ideas of God is that our symbols, the images, the mythological forms which we use to describe God have an extremely powerful influence on our feelings and on the way we behave. After all, I was a member of the Church of England when I was a small boy, and that had a very powerful effect on me. And in the Church of England, it's quite obvious, from an emotional point of view, as distinct from a very intellectual point of view, that God stands behind the King of England. And the King of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the whole hierarchy of lords and ladies and noblemen and officials who descend from this point are somehow involved, at any rate this is perfectly clear to a small boy, are somehow involved with the hierarchy of heaven. Because at morning prayer, to which we went every Sunday, the minister would pray a prayer which began, O Almighty Father, high and mighty, King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers upon earth. Most heartily we beseech thee with thy favor to behold our most gracious sovereign Lord King George, etc. And so this was a very courtly procedure at which the clergyman, dressed in his proper robes, proceeded to the altar, which is a kind of earthly symbol of the throne of heaven, made due obeisance, and presented this petition with all proper humility. Now, these are things that if you're brought up in that environment, you take for granted. That seems to be the natural attitude to God. But imagine someone coming in from a culture where God is not conceived in the image of kingship. How strange he would find this behavior. There's all this bowing and scraping, because you know very well that places where they bow and scrape and where there are thrones are places of terror. Because anybody who rules by force is and must be basically terrified. That's why he has to have all these protections, why he has to be addressed in the right form of language. Say you go into a court today, an ordinary U.S. law court. There is a very strict etiquette. And if you start laughing, the judge will bang the gavel and threaten contempt of court and all sorts of dire punishments. Because here everybody has to be serious. It's like on the parade ground. all those Marines lined up, and they salute the flag, and they have to have a very grim expression on. It's serious. And so in the courts of kings, they have to be serious because kings are afraid of laughter. They're also afraid of being attacked suddenly. So everybody has to kneel down. Because if you kneel down or prostrate yourself, you're at a disadvantage. And the king stands or sits at his throne with his bodyguards ranged on either side. See, like that. We've already got the form of a church. The bishop at his throne, his attendant canons and clergy flanking him on either side. And so certain great Catholic cathedrals are called, they're described with the word basilica. And basilica, from the Greek basiles or basilus, is the king. So the basilica is the court of the king. The very titles of God in the Bible, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, are of course borrowed from the Persian emperors. The Cyrus, which is the Greek word, Kyrios, meaning Lord. So the Mass begins with the invocation, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy upon us. The titles are borrowed from the Persian emperor, and so the rites that have become associated with Christian religion, and to some extent the Jewish religion, are reflections of those great autocratic monarchs of the ancient Near East, the Cyruses of Persia, the pharaohs of Egypt, and people like Hammurabi, who were the great Chaldean monarchs. The universe was conceived then as being ruled on a political pattern like that, so that Hammurabi in particular, and Moses after him, were great lawgivers. They were the wise ones who laid down the rules. They were the patriarchs who said, now this is the way everybody's got to behave. Somebody's got to tell what the rules are. And since you can't all agree among yourselves as to what the rules are going to be, I'm going to tell you what to do. And since I'm the toughest guy around here, and I've got these brothers of mine who are pretty tough too, we're going to say, this is the law, see? And you've got to obey. So this is how we have got historically the idea of there being a law of nature. That somebody told nature what to do. Somebody told, for example, a wonderful poem by Father Feeney about bees. God, to some sticky stuff, not yet alive in a hive, said, come, hum, be my bee and buzz as I bid. And sure enough, it was, and it did. See, and in the beginning, let there be light. A commandment. So commandment is the fundamental idea. So the quest of the law of nature is the quest for the true understanding of the Word of God. For by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is that Word? If we could find out the Word of God, here is the idea, you see, we could perform incredible magic. That's why, for example, the name of God in the Bible is not to be uttered except once by the high priest in the Holy of Holies, once a year. Otherwise, that name, Yod-He-Vah-He in Hebrew, we don't really know how it was pronounced. And Jehovah mixes up those consonants with the vowels of Adonai. Then it's all mixed up in translation. But anyway, Jehovah is a polite way of saying what can't be said. Because if you know the word, if you know the name of God, you have power. You have the power of God. And so all ancient ideas of magic were based on knowing the names of God. It is said that there are 100 names of God, and 99 are revealed to us. And the camel knows the 100th name, which is why he looks so snooty. But so also a person in what we now call primitive orders of society are loath to reveal their names. Because if I know your true name, I can utter it and have power over you. Now, you say, well, that seems a very naive idea, but it is exactly through the knowledge of names that we have Western science. And that is magic. That is through trying to understand the laws of nature. So that if you could understand the word underneath all the phenomena, you could change the phenomena and create magic. Only this, that many scientists have got rather sophisticated and have realized that the word comes later than the event. That in the beginning wasn't the word. Of course, if you want to make new sense out of the phrase "in the beginning was the word," you have to go to Hinduism, where they have the idea that Vak, V-A-C in Sanskrit, or speech, is the basis of creation. But by this they fundamentally mean vibration. As sound, you see, is they say that is, you see, if you listen to sound and go right down into it, fundamentally get what sound is all about, you understand the whole mystery of things. Because the whole mystery of things is vibrating energy. On and off. Simple as that. Life and death. Life is on, death is off. Have to have off to have on, have to have on to have off. It's quite a relief. But there they say that's the beginning. Now, but they also say, in another sense, on another level, that the roots of Sanskrit, say the root form, say the word Buddha, comes from the root form Bud, which means to know or to be awake. Bhava, which means becoming, comes from the root Bhu, which means to grow. So on. Karma, doing, comes from the root Kri, to act. So they say, though, that the roots of Sanskrit are not simply the roots of a language, they're the roots of life. Because in another sense, altogether, you see, you create the world by the word. And this is something that we're not very conscious of. It's the way you think that determines your basic reactions to what happens. In the words of Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or ill, but thinking makes it so. Thinking is talking to yourself inside your head.